Okay, so here's where to start with your pattern. The first thing I do is I refer to the pattern itself and to the pattern measurements on the back of the envelope as a guide. And it's all over the board with the different pattern companies. As a general rule, I find that Sandra Betzina's patterns run very, very true to body measurements. Burda runs true to body measurements. Marcy Tilton patterns, of course, run true to body measurements. And with other patterns, what I do is I'll start with a basic pattern. So here I found a basic pattern that's got lots of possibilities. I eliminate any collars or facings or bindings or any of that. What I've done here is trim the patterns down. And what I'd recommend for you to do is to refer to the body measurement. So in the extra large here, the bust 46, waist 36, hip 48. What I would do then is, if that's my measurement, I'm going to take and mark the seam allowance at two key places. So I'm going to mark my seam allowance at the bust, and I measure the bust line right underneath the armhole. And I mark the hip at the hip. One of the things I'm liking about this pattern at first glance is that it's got some shaping in it. So that's a really good thing. So what I'm going to do is I would take my tape measure and measure it across, stop at the seam allowance, go over to the next seam allowance. Okay, so that gives me 23 and a half, doubled 46. Okay, no, sorry, 47. So that gives me a 47 inch in the bust. And I'll do the same thing at the hip, measuring across. So we go just to that mark. These are your key places. Okay. I call this my linear computer. I'm not very good at math, but the tape measure doesn't lie. Okay, so I've got 47 in the bust and 47 in the hip. And then I would go back and compare. So with the extra large is a 46 to a 48 bust and a 48 to a 50 in the hip. So what it looks like is, according to this measurement, if I measure 48 inches in the bust, in the hip, this might be a high hip, so that might be why it's a little smaller. But I'm going to watch that because when we tissue fit, I want my pattern to be big enough to go around me.